for joining me for another episode. As always, I appreciate y'all. This is a great conversation. I am a student of Stoic Philosophy. I try to incorporate it in my life for many reasons. It's an operating system to function in high-stakes situation, and my next guest is actually a Ph.D. candidate in philosophy in itself. This is an awesome conversation about jiu-jitsu, about Stoic philosophy and different types of philosophy. I introduce to you guys a fellow practicing Stoic, Michael Tremblay. And then we're gonna wing it off the fly here. Let me get these notes up really fast. Michael, thank you so much for literally answering the call. I thought nobody was gonna want to talk, not Stoicism, but actually come on a podcast and talk about Stoicism. So thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, thanks for asking. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I guess that can actually lead into the very first thing that I was curious of. There's not too many people, I guess, on media channels willing to adopt not only philosophy, but Stoic philosophy in a sense. So what's the biggest misconception about philosophy? Why don't many people gravitate towards it?
Towards philosophy?
Yeah.
So I'm so for the people that don't know, I'm a PhD candidate in philosophy right now. So I've been doing it pretty seriously for, I guess, the last 7 or 8 years. But one thing I would say is I think some people just don't know about it or don't really know what it is. I mean, that was for me at least. Like when I went into university, I went into psychology because I was interested in the mind and I was interested in how behavior works and character. But that's really, those questions that I had are really better answered in philosophy, but I just didn't even know what it was. I didn't do it in high school, never read a philosophy book. You hear it kind of conceptually, but it sounds like this really abstract, unapplied thing. And I guess maybe that's a good answer to it. I think
Yeah.
to the uninitiated, it sounds like the most abstract, the most unapplied, unhelpful, unpractical thing. But certain parts of philosophy, especially like Stoicism and other stuff we can talk about, are incredibly applied and incredibly helpful. But people just don't know that. They haven't been exposed to it.
Okay. Yeah, I do agree with that. It kind of just seems like if it doesn't seem to, touch a nerve in your life in some way, like basically if the Stoic quote or if the philosophy doesn't help you in a certain point in your life, then it kind of seems like nobody ever cares to look for the answer to those problems. Is that kind of safe to say? Because to me, it was, I was having a hard go, as many people do. I'm a father I basically work a 9 to 5, all the typical struggles that you get in a day. And what ended up happening is that at the right time, and I'm sure a lot of, newer practitioners of Stoicism can relate. I got introduced by just an author, Ryan Holiday, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So I, like you, never heard about philosophy in a sense that it mattered to me. I always thought philosophy was just a different version of history. And when I was able to read Obstacles the Way, when I got those real life, real world examples, that's when it actually clicked that this might be something that I should pursue. So So would you agree that if it doesn't really, if it doesn't really heal anything in your life or solve any problems in your life, then most people will probably just skip over it and just keep on moving?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people haven't read it, and then you have to be at a certain period in your life too. I think as you hit on, so you have to and that's the way I think that a lot of great art or ideas works. If you return to them at a certain age, you'd be like, oh, this is why people really value this or think this is good. It has to kind of click with what's going on in your life. And Stoicism is a philosophy about like overcoming adversity and a philosophy about becoming the best person you can be regardless of the circumstances. And unless that's something situationally that you're kind of looking for or resonates with you, yeah, I think you might not see the appeal, might not stand out.
Okay. Now, philosophy is a vast ocean. So if you could, explain to me, I don't know much of the broader sense of philosophy. I pretty much just kind of focused in on Stoicism. So if you don't mind giving me a quick rundown on philosophy as a whole, and then after that, can you let me know why you chose Stoicism out of all the different types of philosophies?
Yeah, this is great. So I don't know what level, if you have any follow-up questions, let me know what level we want to go for this.
Sure.
But philosophy literally is philosophos, and philo is love, sophos is wisdom. So it's the love of wisdom. So it originated in the form we're going to talk about. Obviously, it's going on all across the world, and you're having kind of Buddhism and other type of philosophy popping up in Asia. But philosophy, in terms of Stoicism, originated in ancient Greece, I guess around 400, 500 BC. And it was these people were mathematicians, they were scientists, they were people who sought the truth, right?
Yep. Sorry about that. Go
They
ahead.
sought. Oh, it's all good. So they sought answers, and they weren't just like looking, to acquire positions of power, to acquire, certain things they wanted. They wanted the truth. Um, and so, then you have Socrates as kind of the first major figure, Plato, Aristotle, probably these names you're familiar with and heard of, although maybe
Yep.
not have studied in the same depth. And then, kind of after these people laid the groundwork for philosophy, there started what was called Hellenistic philosophy, which is what Stoicism is a part of. And what
Okay.
Hellenistic philosophy was these were philosophies of life. So we're not just interested in how the universe is, or we're not interested in concepts about logic or things like this. We want to know how best to live, and that's what Hellenistic philosophy focused on. And in a way, these were really functionally taking the role that you see like in religion today as well. They gave you lessons and advice about how to best structure your life and what
Okay.
basically the purpose of life was. So Stoicism is one of those. There's like Epicureanism, cynicism, skepticism. There was all these different schools that sprung up around 300 BC, arguing about the best way to live. All of them, I think, have value, but Stoicism seems to be the one that's still resonating. It's the one that I like the most, but it still resonates most with people today.
Okay. And in your opinion, what's the reason for that? Because I do agree with you. I do think Stoicism has kind of made a splash in modern media,
Mhm.
in a sense. I've heard about it in sports, which we'll get into a little bit later. Different areas, political people, a lot of different, references to Marcus Aurelius, et cetera, et cetera. So why do you think out of all those, Stoicism is the one that sticks today?
Yeah, I think for two reasons. So I think the first reason is that Stoicism provides like a really simple set of tools that can just reduce your anxiety, make you feel better, make you perform better in situations in a matter of a couple. Like you read one book and you can
Hmm.
you can see a noticeable change in your behavior and the way you approach situations. Like what's really famous in Stoicism is the dichotomy of control, which is this idea that there's some things up to you, there's some things not up to you, and what you should focus on and what matters are the things up to you. And what's up to you is your choices, your behavior, your decisions. So when you enter a stressful situation, use the example of sport, but this can be work, this can be relationships. What matters and what you should focus on is your choices and your behavior. And if you do that well, you've done as well as you could in the situation. And that's a really simple, profound concept
Yeah.
that you can learn in one book and you can take away, and it will really help you. So there's a couple tools like that in Stoicism, and then I would say the second reason, and the thing that I really like about Stoicism is it gives us a picture of what a good life is that I think is really appealing. Because if you look at Aristotle, I don't know how technical we want to get into the previous people, but someone like Aristotle would say like a good life is a combination. You have to be a good person, but you also have to have
Yep.
a certain degree of wealth. You have to have a certain degree of fame and social status. That's what a good life is. And the Stoics, in response to this, say no, like a good life is just to be virtuous. And we take this back to the dichotomy of control. What they mean by virtue is they mean to be a good person, to be an excellent person. And what they mean by that is the kind of person that makes the best choices in situations. So it's this conception of happiness and a conception of a good life that's really accessible to anybody. Because no matter what your life is, you can act better or worse given your situation.
Right. So
You can,
you're not in control of being wealthy, but you're in control of enjoying the things that you have.
yeah, you're in control of enjoying those things you have, and you're in control of you know doing your best to change those circumstances or modify those circumstances so that they're better. If you think if money is something important to you, like you want to provide for your family or you want to get a certain degree of security, um, the Stoic says what matters is this pursuing that well and
Yeah.
acting well in those situations.
Okay. Now, is there a predefined, like, Christianity would have, the Ten Commandments? Is there like a predefined, are they predefined Stoic virtues that you would have to follow? I hate to use the word rules. That sounds kind of dominant, but
Yeah.
what are the virtues?
Okay, so this is a part. So the guy that I study most is Epictetus. That's my favorite one.
Okay.
And he doesn't focus on the virtues as much as other people, but the virtues are going to be temperance, so
Yep.
everything in the correct moderation.
Okay.
Um, you're going to have wisdom, so knowledge of how to act and how to perform. It's going to be justice, so a knowledge of who is due what and what those people deserve. And oh no, I want to say the last one is piety, so like a good relationship
Okay.
with the gods. But really, the virtues here are types of knowledge is the most important part.
Okay.
So they think a good person is a person who knows what to do. So navigating situations well is about just like knowing who you are, understanding yourself in relation to the world, and acting well in that situation. I know it's a bit vague, but it's going to be person specific and situation specific.
Sure.
Uh,
So sort of like a functional operating system for a person.
yeah, and there's going to be some things that it's almost best defined negatively. So like best defined in terms of things you don't want to do. So what you
You have an
don't want to
example?
do,
Yeah.
yeah, what you don't want to do is you don't want to value things over being a good person. So, if you have a choice of like screwing someone over and making a lot of money, um, you're just not going to do that, because what you've done is you have a mistaken set of values where you value money over being a good person. So basically, what it is I really take this as a guiding principle negatively, of like nothing compromising your character, or no kind of good, no kind of external thing is
Yep.
worth compromising your character. And as long as you're not compromising your character, you're allowed to pursue, whatever you want. If you like nice things, if you like socializing, if you like making art, you like making podcasts, pursuing
Yep.
any of that is fine as long as you're not compromising your character. But if in you trying to make this as good of a podcast as possible, you talk bad about somebody, or whatever the example is, you act improperly in pursuit of that goal, that's when there's a problem.
I see. Okay. So that goes back to the temperance. So you don't want to indulge in something so much that you're losing, I guess, focus in the other virtues.
Yeah, or really, if you go back to this dichotomy of control,
Yep.
all the important things are going to be up to you, right? So what's
Right.
important is making good choices and being a good person. And at any point, if you think, oh, what's important is actually wealth, fame, even physical safety or security, that's more important than being a good person. I'll do something terrible if I'm threatened, something like this, because I don't want to get
Yeah.
hurt. You've now you've made a bad decision about what's valuable. You think the wrong kinds of things are valuable. Um, that's the most important claim, I would say.
I see. Okay. Now let's go back. You said Epictetus was your favorite, or the most studied that you study. Is he your favorite?
Oh yeah, yeah, Epictetus is great.
Okay. And is there a reason for that? If you could give the listeners a few examples, of different Stoics and why Epictetus is your favorite.
Yeah, so the Stoics were around 300 BC when they started, and they lasted until they were popular until around 100 AD. So this is a huge period of time, and we've lost a lot of their writing, unfortunately. But some of what's called the Roman Stoics, so this is Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, are the big three. We have a lot
Hmm.
of their writing left, and those are really the popular ones, because you can really dig in and read what they've written. Epictetus, what I really like about him is he was actually a slave. So he was born a slave. He has a problem with his leg. He has like a physical deformation from the way he was treated as a slave, and he gained his slavery and opened up a school. So you really get this perspective from somebody who's been through just like this really terrible upbringing and been through just terrible stuff, and he's really speaking from experience. About our capacity to be brave, about our capacity to not compromise our character, when being faced with, slavery or potential death or torture, because these are things that he's gone through.
Yeah.
And another really popular one is Marcus Aurelius, and he was emperor of Rome. So we get this really interesting contrast between Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, where two of the most popular Stoics come from two of the most opposite circumstances.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think in Epictetus, you get almost, how do I survive the hardships? And then I think in Marcus Aurelius, you can get this kind of picture of like, how do I avoid temptation? If I'm literally the most
Yeah.
powerful person on the planet at the time, at the height of the Roman Empire, this is a person who's looking to be a good person without succumbing to temptations of, using his power for more nefarious means. And that's like
Sure.
those are really interesting contrasts, and those are the two most popular. And then we also have a lot of writings from Seneca, who was is a high up political figure. He was advisor to Nero, who was just a terrible terrible emperor who did these awful things. So he was trying to he's basically this political advisor who was trying to rein in this crazy emperor, and then ended up trying to like planning this to overthrow Nero and kill him. And when that was found out, he was executed and like forced to commit suicide. So these really interesting historical figures who are then writing this great profound philosophy at the same time.
Right, reflecting a lot. Yeah. If I may, talk about the Stoics a little bit, I also like Epictetus. I actually have on my phone, it just pops up as a quote, one of his famous quotes, which is, "How long are you going to wait before you demand the best of yourself?" That pops up on my phone from Epictetus. I, like you, think that it's incredible that somebody that went through such difficulties like that, being a slave for most of his life, could actually come back from that and be able to teach not only the people around him, his followers, but the world 2,000 years later, how to function and how to operate. So I do enjoy Epictetus as well. Marcus Aurelius lately has been more relatable to me, because I guess the fact that he, like you said, he was at the very top of the world at that time, and this guy was still humble enough to be able to continue to check himself in a journal that
Mm-hmm.
nobody was ever able to see, well, was not intended to see. So it's interesting for me to get into the mind of somebody that had all the power in the world and still would sit down and say, "Hey, man, you know, shake it off," or "Hey, man, stop doing that." Those type of things, and that's what I enjoy about Marcus. But I say all that to get to Seneca. Seneca is by far my favorite Stoic, and I think is because he was very versatile. Like you said, he was high in the political realm. The Nero relationship was just crazy drama. I don't know if you ever read the book by Jim Rom, I believe is his name, Dying Every Day.
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's a really good book. And what he basically did was he turned Nero and Seneca's whole situation into like a soap opera. I mean, it's factual stuff, but the way he wrote it, it was sort of like a soap opera was happening, and it was a really good book. But I also enjoy the dynamic of Seneca writing about, hey, you shouldn't attach yourself to wealth and to all these things. But then he was also one of the wealthiest men at his time. Do you find that contradicting for a Stoic?
Yeah. Just one quick side point that I was just thinking that was interesting when you were talking about that, and I
Sure.
love how into this. I'm glad that you're like, it's just great that you have opinions about which one you like, and like I think this is super exciting that you're so into
Awesome.
Stoicism. Um, I'm thinking now because you were talking about Marcus Aurelius writing for himself. You kind of get this picture where Epictetus, what we have left of Epictetus, he's writing to his students, and then what
Okay.
we have left of Seneca, he's writing to a friend, and then what we
Yes.
have of Marcus Aurelius, he's writing to himself. So we kind of get
Interesting.
these three different levels. I think I just thought of that now, where
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
kind of a teacher talking down to somebody, a peer talking across the table, and then I guess this kind of like talking internally. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
the hypocrisy, yeah, I think it's like I don't know. Um, Seneca has this point about like he has this line about poverty, and he says, so that you're not afraid of being poor, live in poverty for 2 weeks every year. And then, anytime you're afraid of losing your wealth, you'll just think, well, is that all there is to it? Because like, is that the worst that can happen? Because I lived without money for 2 weeks, and that wasn't that bad.
Right.
But it can be tempting when you read that to just be like, kind of insulted, because you're like, yeah, because that was, that was a choice that you had, right? That was
Right.
like a game you were playing. And I think there is something frustrating about that. Um, the kind of the way that I go with this is that these people are not perfect. These people are flawed. Um, I'm sure Seneca had personal issues, or he wasn't a sage. And what the sages in Stoicism is, it's the kind of the thing that you aspire to be, right? It's the perfect person. None of these people were sages, and I think that I can use their lessons to benefit myself, even if they didn't always follow through with them. And he wasn't using his writing to like gain power. He wasn't using his writing like he genuinely believed this stuff, but he was just like failing to do it sometimes. And I think that's
Yeah.
different than talking down to other people when you're failing.
I agree. Yeah. See, what was interesting about that Jim Rohn, I think I'm saying his name. I don't want to screw it up. But anyways, that book that I was talking about is the dichotomy of going back for Seneca to go back to his pages and write, about the steadfast life, and how you shouldn't, let this affect you and that affect you. But then during the daytime, he was practically aiding Nero in certain situations in this, tyranny that Nero was, unleashing on the people. And I think when I read it in like a dramatic fashion, like the author puts it in that book, it made it really like, it kind of made you want to hate Seneca. But then some of the most profound stuff I've read in Stoicism comes from Seneca and his letters to Lucilius, and certain writings like that. But then the guy was also a playwright.
Hmm.
So I mean, this guy was, probably one of the most incredible people of his time, but was, I don't know. He was one of the richest people. He owned slaves. He was kind of going against his writing, is what I'm trying to get at. Very tough.
Yeah, I think so. I Again, I think I stand by this, where as long as that person wasn't judging other people and
Yep.
wasn't like, you know, if he wanted to be a great Stoic and he was failing, I don't see it. I find that that's relatable.
Okay.
Um, I think that's I don't know enough about his life to judge him. I think you need to be careful, not you, but like people need to be careful about having these people as role models. And I
Yep.
think that you're making the right call and like questioning these figures. But I don't know, it happens in philosophy all the time, where somebody can write something really great but not be the best, but you still kind of mine that for value, and you still, if I can take something from that helps me, then that's good enough.
That's an absolute great point. Yeah. So, from Epictetus, or from some of your favorite writing, how do you incorporate in your daily life Stoicism?
Yeah, this is great. Um, I mean, I think the dichotomy of control is just something that I approach from all angles now. So
Okay.
I'm always just evaluating any situation. Is this something I can influence? And how can I influence it? And I focus on that, and try not to let my focus drift to the other things, because those will it's a not helpful, and b it's like psychologically damaging if you're
Okay.
really worried about things outside of your control and bad things like that. Um, or you get, even if it's a good thing, you get too emotionally invested in what somebody else thinks of you. That's like not your control.
Sure.
So that's something I do all the time. Another thing that Stoicism has really helped me with is they have this really, I'm not sure how much you dug into it, but they have this really robust theory of emotion, and this really interesting picture about what emotions are.
Yep.
So the Stoic innovation is to talk about emotions as value judgments, right? So, like, I don't know, when I was growing up, I never really talked philosophically about what emotions were. They're just kind of things you felt. Something happened, you got pissed off.
Yep.
Something else happened, you were ecstatic. And the Stoics are like, no, like, what are these things? What are these feelings? What's causing them? And they argue that what causes an emotion is a value judgment. So I'm sad when I think something bad has happened. I'm
Right.
angry when I think something bad has happened and it was someone else's fault. I'm happy when I think something good has happened. So these feelings, our emotional life, are value judgments. And so the Stoics think that like one of the best ways to become happier is not changing the external world, but just correcting and fixing inappropriate value judgments. So
Mm,
Seneca has this line about we suffer way more in imagination than we do in real life.
one of my
And the
favorites.
concept
Yep.
of it, yeah, the concept behind this is just that like I'm already assuming, first of all, I'm judging something to be bad when I don't know how it's going to turn out. And then B, I'm like assuming it's going to happen when I don't know it's going to happen. And that's
Right.
producing all of this anxiety. And these are just like incorrect beliefs. So one of the easiest ways to fix your emotional life is just like to attack and correct these incorrect beliefs. And we see this. This is actually was so CBT, which is like a common contemporary form of psychotherapy, is based on Stoicism and has taken this idea and used it in contemporary therapy. But that's been hugely impactful for myself. It's also been hugely impactful. I don't know what it's like for you, but sometimes as a man, and I think like men who are like attracted to Stoicism, sometimes we like don't like feeling these kind of extreme emotions. We want to figure out how to handle them.
Yeah.
And Stoicism also taught me that these things are not things to be ashamed of because they're not things that are indicating any kind of like weakness. They're just reflections of how I view the world, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah.
if I think something bad has happened and I genuinely think it's bad, it's okay to be upset about it. What's not okay is to be anxious or upset about things that, are not I'm not right about or I don't know about. That's the kind of the time when you're wallowing or indulging. And it's not weakness, it's ignorance. And that's helped me really navigate my own emotional life.
Yeah, I agree. I've adapted some of that in my practices of stoicism. It's definitely a reflection is a good way that I could put it. And
Hmm.
yeah, being able to catch which I think is the same thing that you're calling the value proposition, but being able to catch a false perception.
Hmm.
I find that me myself, and I'm sure the majority of people are completely advanced at making stuff up. Like we just become this species of, as soon as we see a thought, like you said, or as soon as we feel something, we have this immediate label to attach to this thing. And I think you're right. I think if you don't, you know, pull this back and actually analyze it, you're gonna create a bunch of fear that you don't, necessarily need in your life, and is actually gonna pull you down in life.
Yeah.
So stoicism has definitely helped me in that sense, where it's like, hey, wait a minute, question this thought. What is this thought? Why is it that it's happening? And should I feel this way about it? But not necessarily be upset that I feel that way about it.
And there's also two I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head, this Epictetus or Seneca comes up with this metaphor, but there's this metaphor of like this like fortress, and your mind is this fortress. So one way to apply stoicism is you think of it like on the defense. Like I'm not going to let anybody in this fortress. Not going to let any of the bad guys in. And these are
Yeah.
like negative, unhelpful, false thoughts. And that's really helpful. And then there's also this idea of like walking around the streets of your own, of your own mind and like pulling apart your deep value judgments that you already believed, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
20 years ago. So there's these incoming thoughts, these incoming anxieties that you can stop, identify, and throw away if you don't want them. And then there's also the kind of like self-reflection and deeper work. And it works in both levels. I think what you were bringing up, I think I was talking about the kind of inside the fort already, and you're bringing up
Yep.
a really valuable point of you know just not letting anything in, catching these things as they come.
Yeah.
um
Defending. Yeah. Right.
yeah, which is hugely helpful because a lot of the time, you know another innovation of stoicism or thing that they point out is like this process is happening whether or not you know about it or not, right? But
True. Yeah.
once you know about it, it's way easier to identify, slow it down, check what's happening. But people are just going around, we're all just going around doing this all the time without noticing. So even just recognizing that this process is happening is hugely helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is obviously not something you just wake up tomorrow morning and perfect. So, how would somebody start to anybody listening that thinks that this is interesting? How would somebody even start to build the ability to slow their thoughts down and start reflecting and doing these type of things?
Yeah. So I mean, so we sorry, 1 second. Let me just generate. So okay.
Okay, yeah, no
So
problem.
I'm just trying to think of the best way to put this because there's so many directions. the first thing is like an awareness, right? So you can't do anything without an awareness, and this is sometimes called mindfulness.
Yep.
um, but just the capacity to observe. And sometimes when we come into Stoicism or these kind of, any sort of self help philosophy, we want to fix, we want to change right away, like you just pointed out. But the first thing is like you have to tell what the tools are. You have to tell what's going on. So the first thing is just to cultivate this capacity to observe. And one thing that's really popular that a lot of people do is journaling. And this is a way that they can like write down their thoughts and reflect on their thoughts and
Yeah.
how they were feeling in that day, and just get this awareness of like, what was I thinking? Where was my mind going? What was upsetting me? Why was it upsetting me? Because you can't fix any of this until you have it on the table, right?
Sure.
You got to identify, you got to diagnose the issue first. So the first
Yeah.
thing is to cultivate that mindfulness. I just kind of do it by like reflecting on what I'm thinking. I know a lot of people find journaling really helpful. I think some people meditate. I just kind of like think about and reflect. I'm a real like, I mean, I do philosophy. I really like to sit in my own head. But for people who like to put it down into something specific, I think writing's good. Even the act of reading, right? If you start reading Stoicism and you're reading authors, that's an active process of like reflecting on life and on your own values.
Sure.
I think once you've started reflecting, the next thing there is to get better at like changing your mind and get better at making the right judgments. That comes from understanding why things are wrong. That comes back to the dichotomy of control, right? So like in stoicism, it's not just focus on yourself because that will hurt less. It's like focus on yourself because the other stuff doesn't matter. you know you get caught
Yeah.
up in traffic. It's not just like, well, if I get pissed off, that's going to make me upset, and being upset sucks. But it's like that thing also does not matter. It's like not only is it going to upset you, but it's also just this like false opinion. If you think this has like somehow ruined your day, or you think this has somehow made your life worse, it didn't until you got upset about it, right?
Yeah. Right. So you
um
perceived it that way. Right.
yeah, so it's both, getting a grasp on your own perceptions, and then understanding, what is valuable, what is right with those perceptions. And I think the dichotomy of control, not being upset by things outside your control, is a really good starting place for that, and a really good place to build from. So understanding the dichotomy of control and implementing. So I guess those are the first two stages. um and I would think that probably the third stage, or at least what I do personally, is then once you're there, moving from just these incoming thoughts and starting to deconstruct these like internal narratives or these deeply held beliefs you have. What deeply held beliefs are causing me pain without even noticing it? Maybe I really think I need to be popular or well liked to have a good life, and that causes me like a ton of social anxiety when I hang out with people. Or maybe I think people are like thinking about me more than they are. Or maybe I think I need to, have a certain amount of wealth to be happy. What are these deeply ingrained beliefs you have that are causing you anxiety? And that I would say is like kind of a third stage. So you're moving from, mindfulness of your mind to recognizing incoming thoughts day to day, to like deconstructing deeply held beliefs that are causing you pain and suffering.
Okay. And I think this is a good point to navigate to something else that is out of our control, but that people seem to ignore. And the Stoics talk a lot about. What's your take on the Stoics and death?
Yeah.
I know that was kind of a
So
180 there, but I just know
I,
that, even though death is certain, we seem to be in this weird plane where we think it's never going to touch us. Right.
yeah.
And then we seem to ignore it. But the Stoics, on the other hand, kind of went head on with, we can't control that we're going to die. We just know that we're going to die. And I want to know your take on the Stoics and death.
Yeah, which I think is really I mean, one thing that ancient philosophy has in common, like a lot of people have a lot of good arguments about this. Seneca takes some arguments from Epicureanism, which is a different philosophy. Epicurean has this great point, which is like, when we're alive, we're not dead, and when we're dead, we don't exist. So there's like there's no issue.
Yeah.
And Seneca kind of adopts that for himself in his Stoicism. But the big Stoic point on death is that, this is a fundamental part of our reality. It's a thing that's going to happen to all of us. It's a thing that we can mentally handle and like understand and deal with well, but most people are so afraid of it that they don't think about it,
Yep.
and then it comes by surprise, or it comes with this great anxiety, or we make choices off our anxiety about it. So So the idea was if you face a thing, if you look it in the face, you can understand what it really is. And they think it's really not something bad for us. And when we understand that, we lose our fear, right? When we change our judgment, we lose our emotion. So the idea is, don't just like not think about death because you're going to keep these judgments you had when you were a kid and you were afraid of dying. Think about death, consider it, recognize that it's going to happen, come to a proper position about it. Um, and I think this comes down to this concept I was talking before about what makes a good person, right? And for them, a good life, a good person is somebody that makes good choices. Um, it so people might disagree with this. People might think, oh, a good life is one where you live as long as possible. And I mean, the Stoics would agree with this, but they would say, you live as long as possible, as long as you don't compromise your virtue, right? If it came down to, if somebody was like, go kill your family or I'll kill you, they'd be like, well, kill me. I'm not
Right.
going to compromise. I'm not going to do something terrible um, just because you're threatening me with death. Epictetus has this passage I love where there's this politician and the tyrant is like, vote the way I want you to. And the politician is like, I'm not going to do that. My job is to be a good politician. And he's like, if you don't do it, I'll kill you. And he's like, well, if your job is to kill me, then kill me. But like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And maybe you kill me, maybe you don't. And it's this idea of like, so we think of death almost as like the worst external thing, right? It's easy to say, oh, be a good person, don't care what people think about you. But this idea of be a good person, don't care if you die, is like really, really hard for people. Um, you know, but the Stoics
Yeah.
just emphasize the importance of personal of your virtue and your character. Um, and death is just a part of life that is like something to be avoided if it can, but not something that you should run from at the risk of harming others or compromising your own character. And
Sure. Yeah.
we see this in people we care about, right? Like who do we value? Who do we look at as heroes? These are people who in moments of crisis were able to value what was right over their own personal safety. We
Right.
recognize that these are the best kinds of people. We dream of being these kinds of people. Yet we're like still afraid of death in these kind of circumstances. And that has to just be because we're making some sort of mistake or we're holding on to some kind of anxiety. What do you think about it? What do you think about Stoics and death?
I like Seneca's approach on death when he wrote to Lucilius and basically told him that, hey, you know, you are already experiencing death. Every moment that has passed is already owned by death.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, and I love that because it flips it on his head and it turns it into from a fear into a motivation. So now
Mm-hmm.
it's basically like, okay, if you want to think about it like Pac-Man and death is chomping away behind me, how can I continue to move forward and collect orbs, right? And eat these little fruits and stay away from the ghost, right? If you want to use the Pac-Man analogy. But I do like that approach on it. And that's how I focus on it more. I mean, with COVID and, all the crazy stuff that's going on, death definitely turns into fear more often than not for me, but I
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that through stoicism, I'm able to learn techniques to wrestle with that, right? To wrestle with the fact that, like you say, the dichotomy of control. I have no control when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. But I do know one thing for certain. And the one thing for certain is that every moment that I have forward means that I already gave death something in return. So I
Mm-hmm.
try to get I try to use that as like you hinted on. I try to use that to spend more time, valuable time with my kids. I try to do work out and take care of my body, things that I want to do, because I know I'm not going to get a second round at this. I'm not going to get another try at this life. But an interesting thing, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, Marcus somewhere in Meditations, I don't remember what book, he basically has this like what you would think is a grim technique of, telling himself, when you put your kids to bed, think that they're not going to live through the night.
that's
And I
that's
think that's super crazy, but it makes a ton of sense.
so Marcus Aurelius really liked Epictetus, and that's actually an Epictetus quote.
Is it?
Uh,
Okay, I didn't know that.
yeah, no, it's all just Marcus was a fan too. So he was like Epictetus's point is kiss your child on the forehead and say to yourself, not to your kid, but to say to yourself, you
Sure.
you're a human being and you too will die.
Yeah.
Um, And and you were hitting at this, and I think in a really profound, helpful way, is this idea of, turning it into motivation, is this idea of contemplating death can be really helpful, because what I've been trying to argue is like, look, a lot of our problems in life is ignorance. We're valuing the wrong kind of thing, we're pursuing the wrong kind of thing, and sometimes we do that even though we're compromising our character or compromising things that are more important. So like we have a mistaken view about what's valuable.
Right.
So you can use this contemplation of death as a way to really focus and recenter what's valuable. You contemplate death and you center and you refocus on your family,
Right.
in a way that's really helpful for you. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's a really profound and helpful way of looking at it. It's a kind of thing, it kind of snaps you out of these like, we all get caught up in stuff, trivial stuff, small time stuff. And it's a way of snapping yourself out of that, and keeping this like, large scale perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think their talks and how they speak to whether, like letters to Lucilius or whatever, they definitely have this, considering Marcus lost what, the majority of his children passed away,
Yeah.
7. So that, I didn't know it was an Epictetus quote. That's fantastic. But the fact that in practical use in everyday life, Marcus actually had to go through this a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And
And
it's, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, and I'll just take an example of how it's practical, taken from Epictetus, because people might be listening to this and be like, "That just sounds super morbid and sad. Like, why would I say that about my kids?"
Yeah.
Um, but Epictetus has this amazing passage, where it's like a recorded conversation. He's having this conversation with this dad who's ran away from home. He's like,
Yeah.
"Why'd you run away from home?" "Well, my daughter's really sick." I don't know if you've heard this story. And
No.
he's like, I'm just having a mental breakdown. Like my daughter's on her deathbed." And Epictetus is like, "What's wrong? Like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, you didn't think your kid was a human being? You didn't think your kid had a risk of dying? And
Right.
now, because you didn't think about that, because you didn't look that in the face and come to terms with that, when your child needs you the most, you're having a breakdown, and
Right.
you can't even be a good father because you're not emotionally prepared to handle your child getting sick." And so
That's
this is this
interesting.
way of like, it's not even like kiss your child and tell them that they're going to die, so that when they die you're less sad, which sounds like really morbid and detached. It's not even that. It's that, so when something terrible happens to your kid, you're emotionally prepared to handle it, because you recognize that nothing is guaranteed, and like their health and safety is not necessary, so that when bad things happen, you're ready to father, to parent as well as possible. It's not just for
Yeah.
personal preservation, it's also so that you can do your job too.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know which Stoic hit on the fact that it's, your relationship should be more like, your loved ones are not your possession. You don't own
Hmm.
them. They just inhabit your life, right? They come in and they go. I don't remember which Stoic specifically hit on that stuff, but I
Epictetus,
found that
that's
very helpful.
Epictetus again.
Oh, Epictetus is pretty much the
Well,
the godfather of all.
he's the one I know best. So he's the one I can confirm when it's him. Um,
Yeah.
but he says like, don't say anything's, don't say you lost anyone, because that has this implication that you owned them or they were yours. It just say that they've gone back. They've been returned. He's talking about when people have died. Um, yeah, and I think that's again, it's this mistaken judgment that's like, you're mine, you belong to me. Like this is a thing that I can confirm. And again, this contemplation of like contemplating death. If you contemplate death, your own death and other people's deaths, you're not taking these kind of things for granted. You're not assuming these people will be in your life, and that helps you focus and appreciate these moments even more.
Absolutely. Yeah. It goes from, yeah, because it's I think to a certain level it's absolutely narcissistic to even think that you would never die. But
Hmm.
let alone, to think that you possess somebody else and that they're never going to die. That's super strange that I guess the human species has figured out that that's like a coping mechanism. If I don't think about it, it
Hmm.
will never happen. That's very strange to me.
Yeah, but then as it turns out, I mean, this is getting me all pumped up. Thanks. This is a good talk. I'm getting
Awesome.
like, I'm getting like, I love talking about this stuff.
I love it.
It's it's a coping mechanism, and it's good when it's not happening, but bad when it happens, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, people are going to die. Um, and You want to be able to handle those situations well, and you want to be able to handle your own illness and eventual death well. And these were people writing, right? This is why it's popular. People that are in the military and stuff like this, like these were people writing where, somebody comes in and burns your town down, or somebody kidnaps you and now you're a slave, or you know, they murder your family. Like these were people who were being constantly confronted with death.
Yeah.
Um, and they had to find the mechanism, they had to find a strategy that allowed them to reconcile with that and still be okay. We're very privileged compared to how these people were living. And so sometimes it can be, you can almost tell that story that, oh, no one's going to die, nothing bad's going to happen. And you can stay in that for a while.
Yep.
I don't know, like assuming you're of like, you live in the United States, or you have a certain amount of security, but these people couldn't, and they had to figure out a way to handle those kind of things.
Right. So that naturally brings me to the current state of things, and obviously how social media in general has amplified everything to stuff that when we were growing up, for say, it was more communal, like we wouldn't know anything past our walls, and now you turn on your phone and you see the most horrific things happening around the world. How can stoicism help through, in your opinion, through these crazy times that we find ourselves in?
Um, I mean,
And
so
and I know that's a
if
huge question, but
yeah, yeah. So let me kind of, um, oh, now you might be able to help me with this one. Who says this one?
sure.
It might be Marcus Aurelius. It's like, you know, I don't know, something like the cloth takes on the color of like the dye that you put it in, or something like this. I'm
Yeah, that
trying to
is
remember.
Marcus.
Oh, great. But the
Yeah,
idea
I
is
don't
like,
remember. I don't remember the exact line either, but yeah. Jeez, you're
the
gonna make
the
me look for
qual
it. But go ahead. I
so
don't want to cut your
so
point
we
off.
we had this picture of this fortress that enemies are coming in, and your job is to like ward off these enemies. You know, what you consume are these things that are coming into your town, into your mental fortress. That's what you
Sure.
consume on social media, the kind of people you talk to, the kind of stuff you listen to. It's just an easy, you have an easier job of preserving that if you consume better things. So I mean, the first point is like, don't consume content that is anxiety inducing, false, or just unhelpful.
Right.
Just I think this would be a stoic claim. They obviously didn't have social media, but don't surround yourself with this kind of content. The second thing, this is a Marcus Aurelius quote. I think it's like, one of the first ones, maybe in book two, where he's like, remember, every day that I'm going to wake up and like encounter people that are, just bad people who
Yep.
don't know any better.
Yeah.
And, they're just pursuing what they think is good. They're mistaken, but they're pursuing what they think is good the same way I pursue what I think is good. And that allows a degree of forgiveness and a degree of empathy when
Yeah.
we look at political polarizations, or people that are very extreme on either side. You get to this position where you say, well, that person, I might really disagree with them, or I really might find it really uncomfortable, but that person is just pursuing what they think is good the same way I am. And like, we
Yeah.
might disagree, but at least I can forgive them. And I don't have to be in this point where I'm like so incredibly offended, or like so anxious that these people with these extreme political positions exist, which is a position some people find themselves in.
Right.
So I think those are 2 points I'm starting with, is like, watch your diet, your mental diet. What are you consuming? And then the second point is, people do what they think is best, right? And learn to forgive other people, or understand that people are just going to do what reflects their worldview. And maybe you disagree with them, maybe they need help, or maybe they should be persuaded otherwise. But it's helpful to let go of that kind of anger, bitterness, or at least take that energy and put it into something more helpful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know if you had something to build off that. That was kind of the two things that I use. I don't know if you wanted to take it in a different direction or anything.
No, no, I don't. Jeez. No, I don't. I don't. I don't necessarily. I do agree. I do love your references to Marcus there. I also like another Marcus one where he says, basically, what's good for the hive is good for the bee. But
Mm-hmm.
I also like to say, conversely, what's bad for the hive is bad for the bee. And the problem that I seem to find nowadays is, I think you're absolutely right. If you're able to filter, um, what you consume, then you're able to navigate it well. But now I think you're battling a completely different monster, right? Because now I think you're not just battling what you want to filter, you're battling these algorithms, right, which are
Hmm.
forcefully putting stuff into your face. Now the Stoics talk a lot about, and you just spoke a lot about being empathetic and being, being tougher. Another Marcus quote: being tougher on yourself and straightforward with others. I believe something along that line.
Hmm.
But I find that much harder to do in a world where everybody just wants to strangle each other at their necks.
Hmm.
Uh, How do you find? Do you find that there's a lot of turmoil out there? Do you see that in your feed a lot, or have you kind of mastered the filtering?
Um, I mean, one thing I've worked on a lot is the filtering. I think during COVID, when you get a bit more insular and you're like less talking to people, and you're
Yep.
seeing, I don't know, for me at least, you see these people and it's like, I talk to you. You're like a reasonable person, but they're posting the most extreme version on social media, where
Yeah.
everything's becoming very, people who are too nice, people who would like have a conversation in person are like arguing really venomously on Facebook or something. You're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Um, but I think filtering is one thing that I've really had to work on since I'm not seeing people as much during COVID. Is like, if this is the only human interaction I'm having, or the majority of it, it has to be more careful, more cautious. And then other thing to keep in mind is like, there's a polarization that occurs with these algorithms, but there's also this polarization that has always occurred with people just like being from different countries and people just
Yeah.
being in different, not having this connection. So yeah, this algorithm is like, you know, I know for one thing I do is like I'll click on stuff that like I really disagree with, and I'll like watch it and I'll like shake my head because I disagree. But then the
Yeah.
algorithm's like, oh, you liked that content? Okay, we'll give you way more now. And you're just scrolling through and you're like, why do I hate all this stuff?
Yeah, right.
Um, which is frustrating. But I know this was the context Marcus Aurelius was writing in, and all these other people were writing in. People have always been at each other's throats. Maybe they just couldn't, post it, but they
True.
always really disagreed and they always really had hard times empathizing with each other. Now they're just able to you're just able to see that disagreement. Two groups that normally wouldn't clash, are friends on Facebook or Twitter or something. But it's still a fundamentally human thing that people have put up with. Um, And I think we do have the tools to handle if we just take accountability. I mean, the same thing like with an algorithm, it's no different than like our diet or ad campaigns. People are always trying to vie for our attention. So it's more
True.
important than ever to really take accountability for our mindfulness and what we're allowing ourselves to consume and how it's impacting us. I know that's kind of like general and vague, but I think that's really all you need is like same kind of thing with diet. You know what's good for you. You just got to eat it. And
Right.
it's like you know what's good for your mind. You know what kind of stuff upsets you. You just gotta stay on the path and stay focused, not let yourself indulge.
Yeah, I agree. I through COVID, I've gravitated towards Marcus Aurelius a lot during COVID because, I mean, a lot of people not only know about who Marcus Aurelius is, but they don't realize that he was actually writing the majority of this stuff during a plague, right? During the Antonine
Hmm.
Plague. So I find him not only super interesting because of that, because the leader of the free world took the time to jot his thoughts down and check himself during the biggest plague of its time. But also, Marcus is the one that speaks a lot, well, at least in my readings, a lot on that human aspect, right? Like we need each other, we're here for each other. And that's how I've been trying to, that along with the dichotomy of control, that's exactly how I've navigated social media. Now, I completely, in the beginning of COVID, I completely removed myself from social media. I was on Facebook, I was on Instagram.
Hmm.
I've boiled it down to Twitter and a little bit of Reddit, about 5%.
Hmm.
And I did that for my own mental health and for being able to align myself with what I want to do. But I was finding it very difficult to be, let's just say, for my fellow human when I was seeing what my fellow human was capable of.
Hmm.
And that's the conspiracy theories and the all that stuff that started happening, and it was right around the political and the George Floyd thing, and then that whole thing started happening, and people that I actually worked elbow to elbow with now turned into this completely different human being. And I kept getting into this battle of, you know, when do I start using my, what I'm learning from Stoicism, and that's, to be good for your fellow man, and when do I cut the line and say, look, I need to ignore fellow man because I can't control what fellow man is doing.
Yeah,
It was just a constant battle.
I think this is a really important point, and something that I think can happen as you start to study Stoicism. So Stoicism has this idea, like nothing can hurt me except my choices.
Yeah.
I have all I need if I'm virtuous. Um, but this is this is the position of the sage, right? It's like we're not the sage, and so like you gotta tune in if stuff is taking an emotional toll on you or stuff is really upsetting you. Um, you want to help your fellow man, but you gotta, whatever the analogy is, put the mask on yourself first when the plane's going down. Like you got to make sure you're in an okay position. And
Right.
none of us are sages, right? Like we're all just like we all have limits, and Marcus wasn't, Epictetus wasn't. They all have limits. They all have times when they get frustrated and things like that. So I mean,
Sure.
I think it's like know your limit and play within it, so to speak. Like don't if something starts really hurting you, and that's like, or like really taking a psychological toll, that's okay to like take a step back and to reevaluate. um but I think sometimes when people start stoicism, they think, well, it's outside the dichotomy of control, so it's not hurting me, or it's not like exhausting me, um talking to these people or seeing stuff like this. And you gotta tune in with your own, where you're at. um yeah, and that's okay. I think, yeah, you help people as much as you can without, really screwing yourself over.
Right.
And it sounds like sometimes people cross that limit. You got to take a step back.
Yeah, definitely. So before we move on from the social media topic, if I know this is just pure if Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or Epictetus were on social media today, what would they be saying? What would they be telling people?
um, oh, that's an interesting question. I've never thought of that. I mean, Epictetus fundamentally works with people, right? Like he had a school, and you came to his school, and he has a lot of writing. I recently read a book on this, actually. He doesn't think it's philosophically helpful, or personally helpful, to go out and try to help people that don't want to be helped. So
Okay.
Epictetus has a very like you come to me methodology. So
Sure.
he has a school. If you come to that school, I'm gonna help you, but I'm not gonna like walk around the market and start arguments with people that disagree or think that stoicism's stupid, or he just does not think that's like a productive use of time.
Yeah.
Um, Now Marcus Aurelius obviously can't really have that perspective as the president, or whatever the analogy is, but like the
Sure.
emperor of the biggest you know the biggest nation in the world. Um, but I think there is this emphasis to this, emphasizing, which again I'm going to say before, that this really profound part of Stoicism for me, which is that our actions, our emotions, our motivations are all based on our beliefs. People do things because they pursue things that they think are good and avoid things that they think are bad. Somebody is not a bad person. That person is an ignorant person, a confused person. And you too would be an ignorant, confused person if you didn't have the life experiences you did. And whatever the analogy, nobody gave you that Ryan Holiday book or whatever you want, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
We're all just people. So I don't know if that's not enough, but I mean, I think that's something that Marcus would emphasize, and I think that's the most important concept, is like you already have the tools to resolve these conflicts internally. You just need to be mindful and present with each other. That you're not like a bunch of these people aren't assholes. These people they just have a different view, and that view might be like deeply wrong. Um, but they're just mistaken,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I do say that if it was Marcus and leading the free world and the biggest empire here, I think we'll be much better off. I just think it just with the whole COVID thing and the obviously the trigger word of Donald Trump and all that stuff. I think Marcus Aurelius, when you read up on him and you see that during the Antonine Plague, he was actually selling off of the pieces from Rome, from like the gold pieces, the gold statues, in order to get currency back to the people. I think that's something that not only the politicians nowadays can learn from, but something that would put this country in a much better state. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's my take on that. Now, Stoicism being naturally a tool or a system somebody would use to wrestle with thoughts, wrestle with emotions, wrestle with perception. I don't know about the other Stoics, but I do know Marcus talks a lot about, he uses a lot of wrestling analogies and fighting analogies. So you do jujitsu. Is that
Yeah.
by coincidence, or is it something Stoic about you?
um, yeah, I mean, everybody, my next research project is planning to talk about Stoics and their use of sport metaphor.
Okay.
Because
Nice.
I don't know, as an athlete, it's something that really inspires me. So yeah, I do jiu-jitsu, I did MMA, I wrestled in university. I'm really big into martial arts, but that's something I began when I was a kid.
Okay.
But martial arts, I didn't start martial arts because I liked stoicism, but I think I liked stoicism because of martial arts. And sport is one of those avenues, as for any kid, where like you look at the values that are taught in sport, which is like hard work, personal accountability, responsibility for yourself, um, taking that responsibility and like helping teammates, helping others, being like working socially together as a group, to
Yeah.
achieve goals. And these are just values that really resonate in Stoicism, which is really about personal responsibility and accountability and becoming the best person you can be. So there's a ton of parallels there. Martial arts and jujitsu tends to be steeped a little bit more in like the Eastern philosophy,
Okay.
but I think people would be surprised by how similar those are, if you only studied one or the other. There's a ton of similarities there. Um, and then there's all these great, I know you read Obstacles the Way, but there's all these great passages in Epictetus that really stand in my mind. Marcus Aurelius has some about wrestling, where he talks about, I'm like a wrestler, not a fencer, because
Love that.
the fencer has to pick up their weapon, but my weapon is always with me. And your
Love that.
weapon is
Oh yeah.
is your mindset and your capacity to make good choices and reflect. But the Stoics learned a lot from sport, and like compared philosophy a lot to sport. Epictetus has one that I really love, where he talks about, don't be upset when bad things happen in your life or you have hardships. I haven't read Obstacle in the Way, but is the Way, but I'm sure it's talked about here. Um, and he says, like, don't be upset when there's hardships in your life, because these are the things that we use to improve ourselves, right? He's like, if you were a wrestler and you went to a gym and you were beating everybody, you'd be upset. You'd go up to the coach and be like, Coach, get me some better training partners. I
Yeah.
only learn when they hit moves on me, when they beat me. And he's like, yeah, look the same way at your life. If your life's going breezy, you're not learning where you can improve your character. You're not learning where you're cowardly or where you could be more brave, because your life's breezing by. But if you're having ups and downs, you're having hardships, you're learning a lot about yourself. And these are really, really important opportunities to learn and improve. Um, so that kind of mentality. And another thing that I talk about with sport, a lot, is that sport is one of these places of intentional hardship. So when you go to sport practice, did you play anything growing up, or what did you?
No,
Um,
I'll be honest with you, Michael. I was a video gamer.
I video game a lot too, but it's not quite the same. I just saw
Yeah,
your
yeah,
post
not
on
anymore
Twitter.
either. But
You were lifting. You were doing some kettlebells.
oh yes, I work out a lot, but it's definitely not a team thing. It's more of a personal thing, and that was later in my life because I was an overweight kid. Naturally,
Yeah,
as a video gamer, I guess.
but
Go hand in hand, I
even
guess.
well, now you're a video gamer that works out, I guess, or
Yeah, well,
and
I
that,
don't really video game as much, but yeah, I guess I'm a tech enthusiast that likes to conversate with people.
yeah. Um, but like you look at lifting weights, right? It's this concept of like growth under duress. So there's this
Sure.
very clear thing that, like, you know if I need to work as hard as I can without breaking myself, and that is how I will improve as quickly as possible. And so, kind of seeking out difficulty and internalizing, sport really teaches you, or weightlifting, to internalize this value that, like, oh, that thing's really hard. Awesome. Um,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
that's hugely beneficial for your growth. And this is a value that the Stoics teach as well.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think a lot of people, when they think philosophy or they think, of the Stoics, they probably think that these guys were kind of just sitting on their ass doing nothing, but they were actually very, they were hunters. They were, they worked out, they did sports. They were very athletic guys, not only in the real world, but with their
mhm.
metaphors and with their analogies and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Epictetus
I
has another.
Yep,
Oh, so I just want to throw in as many Epictetus sports stuff as possible because this is what I
you
love.
should.
Um,
They're all incredible.
he has this other one where he talks about, he's at his school and these people show off, they're like, oh, look how well I've read this like Stoic text. I know all the quotes, kind of like what we're doing. And he's like, that's like you showing off your weight collection, man. Like, I don't care that you have a bunch of plates and like a bench set in your garage. He's like, I want to see your muscles.
Yeah.
And I
Mm.
find that's the thing I always remember, especially because I'm studying so much, is like, man, I just be careful when you're buying these books and you're reading Stoicism that you're not just getting a big weight collection that like sits in your garage, like that's not the point. The point is self transformation. The point
Yeah.
always is self transformation and self improvement. And a lot of times, when we engage, well, I just think when normal people, you can forget that sometimes, and you can, it can turn into like something. Even what we're doing, like I like what we're doing because it's like inspiring, it's pumping me up.
Yeah.
But we want to then not just be inspired, but go out and continue to act well. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah. I
how
would
about?
tell my wife. I tell my wife all the time. Sorry to cut you off, but
No,
in
no,
that
go ahead.
same vein, I tell my wife that the reason. Now, I grew up Christian in a Christian household. My wife grew up in a Christian household. And I went away from that. I'm more of an agnostic now, if I were to say anything. But the reason I gravitated towards Stoicism is that I always felt that Christianity, in my example, was a passive form of living a good life, where it was basically like, well, as long as I follow these rules, I get the eternal prize. And what I really gravitated to when it came to the Stoics was, no, I need to actually physically practice these skills and do this every day, day in and out, so that eventually I would reach that fulfillment. I don't know if that's sort of what you were saying in a sense, where you actually have to
Yeah, I
take
mean,
action on this stuff.
yeah, it's not your capacity to not that we're doing this, but I think you can. It's not your capacity to list things. It's not your capacity to quote, scripture or whatever analogy you
Right.
want. It's your capacity to act well. That's what you should be evaluated on. And
I
I
love
don't know.
that.
I wasn't grown, or sorry, I wasn't grown. I wasn't raised Christian.
Yep.
But I'm sure you can make the same analogy here, where you get people who are able to like tell you all about parts of the Bible, but are doing some like pretty sinister things.
That's a great
And
point.
it's just
Great point. Yep.
for the Stoics that's I mean that's a fundamental cultural disconnect. It's a thing meant to transform you and change you.
Right.
Um, and not even change you like, oh, I feel better now, oh, I'm less anxious, but change you like, wow, because I'm less concerned about what people think about me, I can go and help others better and go and do stuff. I can be more brave. I have
Yeah.
less fear, things like this.
Yeah.
um yeah, and that's
And
that's the core value.
gotcha. And just I don't want to get too far away from you having to take action and having to take responsibility and actually do these things all day. But do you feel that a lot of people are basically putting their life into autopilot? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
is it one of those things where they're not taking full control and using any tool, whether it's religion, whether it's philosophy, and they're putting it on autopilot? Because I do like how you brought up the hardship of putting yourself in hard situations and learning from that, and I'm a big believer in that. When it comes to anything, when it comes to business, when it comes to physical, working out, when it comes to any skill, I think a lot of people have a misconception on how hard they have to work to actually advance at anything.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And then the point about, do you think people are on autopilot?
Yep.
I mean, I'm a big ancient philosophy nerd, just not just Stoicism.
Yep.
And so, in the Oracle in, I think it was Delphi, had a line on it. This was like a very culturally important spot, and the line was just know thyself, right? And this
Okay.
is what Socrates, the beginner, Epictetus's role model, the beginner of Stoicism, the Stoics consider themselves followers of Socrates at the beginning.
Okay.
Um, and we can talk all about that. I really like there's a lot of interesting parts about Socrates as a character, but he was all about self knowledge,
Okay.
right? So he was the first step is to start questioning values, to start questioning yourself, to start questioning the way the world is. So philosophy begins in wonder. That's what he would say. So philosophy, the pursuit of truth, the love of truth, begins with a curiosity. And so
Okay.
we can view autopilot as the antithesis of this.
Right.
And there was a lot of ancient. So there's the Stoics, but there's the Epicureans, the Cynics, the Aristotelians, and today you have all the different religions, so to speak. But I think no matter who you are, what you believe, if you're the kind of person who's actively questioning how do I live a good life and actively questioning how do I improve myself, you're on the journey, you're on the path. You're already doing better than someone on autopilot, no matter what that autopilot is, because
Right.
you at least have the capacity to change, improve, incorporate new information. Um, you know, so I say this when I talk about other ancient philosophies, like I don't care if you like Stoicism or you like the other ones, like just start asking these questions and start pursuing these things and start trying to live the best life. I've grown a bit away from Stoicism and more towards other philosophies as I've studied more, but that
Yep.
started with my love of Stoicism. And it started with me getting on that path of like, what's the best kind of life? How do I want to live? Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of a different metaphor for it, but I think Socrates would think of autopilot as the worst possible thing that could happen.
Yeah.
And philosophy is actually the opposite of autopilot.
And if you're on autopilot, you're not going through anything difficult. Hence, you're not growing. You're not chasing the pursuit of getting better.
Yeah, you're
And
not
I,
you're not like you're not questioning. You're not saying what do I need to do different? What do I
right.
need to change?
And to tie it back to what we were talking about before we went off on this side tangent, that's what sports presents to you every single time you come to the mat is the ability to do something difficult to get better at something and be focused on that.
Sport is a bunch of stuff that I don't want to do that I'm doing because I know it's the right thing to do. And you think about
Interesting.
that, like
Okay.
that is a
Yep.
very guiding principle of Stoicism. I think like what is the most important value a Stoic could have? I would say they're the kind of Epictetus talks about this a lot. They're the kind of person who's directed by what they know is good instead of their fears or their desires for other things. But they're able to just act on what they know is right. And
Right.
so in sport, you get this microcosm of this. I want to be a good wrestler. Okay, well then you should eat this. You should train like this. You should go to these competitions. All these things suck, right?
Right.
So now you have this goal, and what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to motivate yourself, learn how to motivate yourself through a ton of incredibly painful, just like sometimes boring, sometimes hard things, um, in pursuit of a goal that you set yourself. And if you develop that kind of capacity, that is very applicable in any other context. And then I think most importantly for the Stoics, applicable in pursuit of being a good person. You're the kind of person who's able to do hard stuff in pursuit of what's right and what's good.
Right. An excellent practice for the dichotomy of control, which is I don't know if I'm going to go out there and put up 42 points, but I know I'm going to work my ass off. Right. Like you control the effort, you don't control the result.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing that my coach would talk about.
Yep.
Unless you're literally the best person in the world, you only won that tournament because somebody else didn't show up.
I love
Like
that.
unless you're Olympic champion, you only won because the other people better than you weren't there. So you're anytime you win, that's entirely circumstantial. Anytime you lose, it's unless you also happen to be the worst person in the world. Anytime you
Yeah.
lose, it's circumstantial.
I
So
like that.
what's on display and what matters here is how and what you should be proud of or embarrassed about is how well you performed in relation to yourself. And it's kind of like a platitude or a cliche at this point, but it really is in competition, taking this focus away from result, because you know. And so your big thing is business, or what's your passion?
I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm
Mhm.
just a geek overall, man. Like I'm into this
Yeah.
podcast thing. I write, so I wouldn't call myself an author, but I'm working on my first book. Those are the two things I really like to do: have conversations and write.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of a good analogy for that. It's not; those aren't necessarily competitive or other oriented. I mean, writing
yeah,
might be, but like, if you become embarrassed or concerned that your book isn't good, so you don't put it out there, you
yeah,
don't uh, you don't let people read it, but then you don't get the feedback, so to speak, because you didn't let people read it. We
sure,
have these, like, if you become outcome. I mean, it's a simple distinction with dichotomy control, but if we become outcome oriented and outcome focused, we will do things that sabotage our progress. If I
sure.
want to win, I will enter worse tournaments. I you
That's a
know
good point.
that's the
Yep.
that's the easiest way to win. The easiest way to win is not become the best person in the world. That's the very hardest way to win. The easiest way is to do things is to just not do things or do worse versions of those things. So we really sabotage ourselves when we become outcome oriented. And we really flourish when we become, process oriented or personal development oriented.
Right. I guess in the author standpoint, it would be is I don't control how many books I'm going to sell, but I control the practice, the art, the writing, and getting it out to the
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
And maybe,
That.
maybe you're worried about selling books, so you don't write something as good as you could have because you're trying to, like, make it popular. I don't know. There's
Mm,
all these examples of where if
yeah.
you're
Yeah.
outcome oriented, you can't be the best author you could be if your goal is what other people think of you. It's just not going to
Yes.
happen.
And I think that across all boards, across life,
Yeah.
I think that's the case. Sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about jujitsu. And the reason I ask is because right around the time that COVID started, late February into March, my wife and I were actually interested in trying to take jujitsu classes.
Woohoo. That's great.
Now, yeah, I don't know if that's like jumping off a cliff. Like I don't know if I should be starting at jujitsu. But our goal is self defense, right? We need to be able
Mhm.
to whatever situation. I mean, we're not rowdy people, so we don't get in fights often. But when you get into an altercation, you need to be able to defend yourself, or if you get
Yes.
assaulted, et cetera, et cetera. So COVID put the brakes on all that, and I want to know: is starting with jujitsu off the bat jumping off the cliff?
Oh, this is great. This is the ideal podcast for me, man. We talk about stoicism and then we talk about BJJ. This is dream come true.
Sweet man.
Um, the Jiu-jitsu is, like, weird in a couple ways because, like, I don't know, if you're a normal person, like, you don't really get that close to other people. You don't have other people, sweating in your face and stuff like this. Like, there's a kind of comfort zone that you have to get over, which is, like,
Okay.
not an issue if you're with a good club with people you trust. Um, and then it's just, like, it's really hard. It's just a hard thing, and it's not a thing. If I'm going for a run and I get tired, I just stop running. But this is
Okay.
like, if you're doing jujitsu and you get tired, the other guy, mounts you and, starts submitting you, and it's just like you can't rest. So there's this kind of, like, this physical difficulty to it. That being said, I think it's the absolutely best thing you could do for self defense. And there's a couple, and especially for your wife as well, especially for women.
Yeah.
A couple of simple reasons for that is that, on a basic level, if you're in the kind of distance where you can strike someone, you're in a distance where you can run away. You really have to worry is when someone grabs you. Now you can't move. You can't take yourself out of that fight, out of that altercation.
Right.
The second thing is, I don't know if you've ever been. Have you ever been in a fight?
Absolutely. High school.
Okay. It's people are pretty tough, and it
Yeah.
can be pretty hard on, on your hands and things like this. Like, I think of someone like your wife, you know some big dude, she could probably punch that guy in the head and she'd break her hand before she knocks the guy out.
Sure.
Like, you're
Yeah.
just not gonna come in like a kung fu movie and, do the strike to the head and they fall down. It's just
Right.
not like that. Like, people are hard to stop with strikes. But if you mount somebody, you can stop. If you choke somebody out, it doesn't matter how tough they are. That's and not only does choking out people end the fight, it's also way safer. I would rather get, how much I would rather get choked out than hit in the head until I'm unconscious. So not
Right.
only are you not only are you de-escalating the fight more effectively, you're doing it more safely for the other person.
Interesting.
That's
So
my
I
quick
know
that's
that
my quick spiel.
I know it sounds, and that was a great spiel. I know it sounds kind of weird, but properly knowing how to choke somebody out. What's the difference between knowing how to choke somebody out and doing it the wrong way and killing somebody?
Okay, so the two main differences is you have the trachea, which is the windpipe, and then the
Okay.
side of the neck. So the jiu-jitsu choke is putting pressure on the side of the neck.
Okay.
It's called a blood choke, but it's not actually cutting off the blood flow. What it's doing is it's making your body think that your blood pressure is higher than it is. So your
Yeah.
body naturally lowers your blood pressure. And so when you pass out from a blood choke or jiu-jitsu choke, it's the same as when you sit up too fast and you get dizzy. That's what happens. It's not very painful or unpleasant at all. But if you put pressure on the windpipe, we can hold our breath for like 2 minutes. So that's going to be like a long, like brutal strangulation.
Yeah.
Um, B, you can do serious damage to that person. You can hurt their windpipe, you can cause it to swell, and then they can't breathe after, and then they can actually
Oh,
die.
gotcha.
But with the chokes on the side of the neck, it takes 3 seconds for them to go unconscious, and then if you let go, they come back right away. The only
Interesting.
mistake you can't really make a mistake on that one. You'd have to choke them after they're unconscious for a prolonged period of time to hurt them, and that would have to be very intentional. You're not going to be choking somebody after they're already limp for 2 minutes by accident.
Huh. Interesting. And I bet it's humbling to get choked out.
It's very humbling. I got choked out at a tournament, and it was really funny because I woke up, but you're kind of like disoriented, and I started
Yep.
like walking over into another ring, and I'm just like walking all over. I'm like I have no idea where I am. And another way too, though, it's I don't know. It's kind of it's in weird jiu-jitsu mentality. It's kind of ego preserving because you're like I didn't give up. I fought to the death.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's an interesting take. Yeah.
in that sense, you're like you kind of feel badass when you get choked out.
Yeah.
But I think when you start, hopefully nobody's choking you out when you start. But I think when you start, what's humbling is this realization of how, unless you've rolled with a black belt or even even a blue purple belt, you just don't realize how easily these people can control you, and like totally physically control you and hurt you or kill you if they wanted to. And I mean, I've been doing it since I was a little kid, so I didn't really have that humbling perspective of like thinking I could fight and learning I couldn't.
Yep.
But you see a lot of people humbled, and it's kind of like a 50-50. They either like don't like it and they leave, or they go, wow, I need to do this.
Yeah.
um I think
Th-
jujitsu. I mean, I have a book chapter coming out about how MMA teaches Stoic values. So I'll shoot it your way when it comes out.
oh, please
Um,
do. Yeah.
yeah, but this is kind of this intersection that I think is really valuable, and I think a lot of people in jujitsu and martial arts in general are hitting upon Stoic values without even realizing it. So I want to kind of just pull those out to the surface.
That's super cool, man. Yeah, and like you said a little while back, as opposed to like boxing, getting punched in your head over and over again, I think it's a much
Well,
smoother transition to get choked out every now and then
yeah, like
instead
you
of
can do
getting.
an.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's like what I'm looking for is like a really difficult thing that has really low consequences. You know,
Sure. Yeah,
I can
that,
be
that that's
like,
an
I
awesome
can be
point.
like,
Yeah.
what's hard is like going out and picking fights with the toughest guys in the neighborhood. It's like, okay, I guess that's hard, but like you might get really hurt. But you go to a
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu mat, it's the nicest people, and now it's gonna be physically painful. It's gonna be really exhausting. It's gonna check your ego, but there's no risk to it. Same thing as competing, right? The only
Yeah.
risk is you lose $50 and you look embarrassing in front of your family, but there's no real risk. And those kind of opportunities, you know, are so sparse in life. Often when things are difficult,
Yeah.
it's in a situation where it matters, and those aren't good. Those aren't really good training grounds. We want to find difficult situations that don't matter, and jiu-jitsu is like the perfect place for that.
I love that. So how would one? I know you said when you find a good club or a good how does one know what's a good one and what's a shitty one? Especially me coming in from brand new from off the street.
Um, I think what matters is that you're getting what you're looking for, and
Okay.
so that's going to be unique to the individual. But
Yeah.
if you're looking for self-defense, then you want legitimate BJJ. So the first thing you do is you find a legitimate club. And that's usually the jiu-jitsu community is pretty good at policing itself and being like, hey, this guy's a fake black belt, like don't go train there.
Gotcha.
Um, but you want to find a legitimate club of people that do jiu-jitsu. Then the next thing you do, the most important thing is that you keep training. The best thing for self-defense is that you keep training. Um, and so what you do is you find a club that you like and that has the same values you have. I don't know, like maybe you're super competitive, maybe you're super. I don't get necessarily that impression if it's a thing you and your wife are looking to do. Looks like
Yeah,
it's a thing you're going to like have fun as a family and learn a skill. So you
absolutely.
find a
Yeah,
club that supports that doesn't hurt you or is unnecessarily rough or anything like this. You just find a place you could see yourself going for a long time, and that's the most important thing, and that's really personal. So
gotcha.
I would rather be in a good environment that is sustainable, that has worse jujitsu, than the best competitive club in your city that makes you quit after 6 months because you're not enjoying it.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. All right, and what's training look like for you? Specific. Is it like what are your workouts? Is it just jujitsu, or do you do workouts throughout the day? Weightlifting, kettlebelling. What does a workout look like
Yes,
for you?
so I'm doing. I mean, it's a lot different now. Now I'm mostly lifting weights.
Okay.
Um, because of COVID going on. But before I would train typically around 5 days a week, 6 days a week. I'm
Okay.
doing my PhD, so it was just like I would just train once a week, so usually from around 6:30 to 9, um, and that would be like half technique and then half rolling, which is like sparring and jiu-jitsu. And then for weightlifting, keep it pretty simple. Like I work out twice a week, 3 times a week, and I just try to hit the major muscle groups. So when I come in, it's like um, free weights, bar stuff, like legs, chest, back, shoulders. So I might go in and like, squat, bench, bent over row and like overhead press or something. Just trying
Gotcha.
to do because the way I look at weightlifting for jiu-jitsu, some of it is about improving your strength, but a lot of it is about making sure your body's strong because you're going to be it's injury prevention. You're going to be getting
Okay.
squished, you're going to be getting twisted. And like if somebody's arm barring me, I'm going to try with all my might to stop that arm bar. But if I don't, if you're not in shape, you're going to hurt your arm. You're going to pull a muscle, even if
Okay.
you're just having fun rolling. Is the picture? But if you're weightlifting consistently and you're physically strong, you're able to defend that technique without any sort of injuries. That's how I look at weightlifting,
Gotcha. Well, be
especially
able to
in a
hold your ground.
yeah, especially in a weight class sport, right? Because you can't really. It's not beneficial for me to get bulky because then I
Okay.
just fight bigger. Then I just fight bigger guys.
I see.
What's beneficial is that you're in a position where you're nice and strong for the size you are, so your body can do the techniques you've learned effectively without getting hurt.
I see. And what about for children? What do you still recommend jujitsu? I
Oh, I
got a
think
10
jiu-jitsu
year
is
old.
great. Yeah. Oh, I mean, you're speaking. You're like talking to the wrong person if you want an unbiased perspective. But my dad actually runs a jiu-jitsu club, so it's like our family business. So I grew up
Okay.
training and I grew up teaching kids. Um, I think jiu-jitsu is excellent for a couple reasons. It teaches overall body awareness. Like if you start as like a kid, so it's almost like this gymnastics, but
Okay.
then you're also learning an essential skill, right? Like I think every kid should learn how to swim. Um, that's an important skill in case they fall off the dock, right? Or they I don't know. We have a lot
Sure.
of lakes up here. I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but this idea of like every kid should have a couple essential skills, and I kind of look at a blue belt in jiu-jitsu as like this essential skill where you're just able to hold your own if something happens. Um, so you're learning these basic body coordination skills. You're learning to play well with others, and you're learning like an essential skill of self-defense and a very
Nice.
genuine kind of self-defense. I'm all about it. I think it's great.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely look at it for the same reason, self defense across the board. We want to, the kids obviously, if bullying becomes a thing, to be able to handle themselves. And I know that makes it sound like it's I want my kids to be like lethal weapons. No, not at all. I just don't want my kid the one to get his, have, like you said, not know how to use their body and get their ass kicked every time or something like that.
Yeah,
Hopefully
and
they don't find themselves in those situations, but you never know.
yeah, and ironically, and I don't mean to be like, I don't want to be like, I'm not trying to sound like a tough guy here, but like, I got bullied a lot less in high school as I got better at stuff. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't mean to be victim blaming here, but like a lot of times bullies just they pick people that they can tell, or they like seek out people that don't seem confident with themselves and with their capacity to fight or something like this, right?
yeah,
And I think just like, ironically, the more you train to fight, the less likely you are to fight, because people are like much less likely to start something with you,
I see. Yeah.
which is
Um,
helpful for a kid.
yeah, no, that's definitely something. Now you just said you guys have a family business, and I know it's different everywhere. But jujitsu during COVID, good idea, bad idea? How do you feel about that?
So where do you live right now?
We're in Massachusetts. Oh, I'm in
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, cool. Um, I'm sure there's great jujitsu there. So we're kind of in this stage where we're not allowed to roll right now.
Okay.
So we're allowed partner drilling. Um, Personally, I think it's like epidemiologically. So in terms of virus spread, I think it's a terrible idea.
Yes.
Um, it is. I think they've done a study where, um, in terms of contracting, illnesses like ringworm and stuff like this, jujitsu is actually worse than having sex. You're actually more likely to contract the illness doing jujitsu with somebody than you are having sex, because
Interesting.
it's like, well, you go to you. I mean, it's like the equivalent of like an orgy or something. Like in terms
Yeah.
of this, like you got like 20 people in a room who are all dripping wet,
Yeah.
all switching around with each other. In terms of a virus, it's terrible.
Sure.
Now we have this more complicated issue of like quality of life, and like what are we worth, like what's worth giving up, and these kinds of issues. Um, I also personally, I'm really worried about a lot of people I know losing their businesses. Um, I know a lot of the jiu-jitsu community is at risk of losing their business because they can't have people coming in and train and um, filling the spaces. So that's
Yeah.
that's all tough. But like anything else, it's a balance. And in that case, I kind of defer to the experts, the epidemiologists, about what risk is worth taking. And it just sucks that the thing that I love to do happens to have no, socially distanced equivalent.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can see where it's extremely difficult. Yeah, I definitely feel for businesses, specifically the restaurant businesses out there. These up and down rules between what you can do and what you can't do are just extremely difficult to navigate, especially in a situation where restaurants have to order food ahead, right, and be
Yeah,
able to survive in a thin margin. It's not one of those things where they could just open the door and people can walk in.
yeah,
So I do feel for that. So that's the only thing that's holding me back from jujitsu right now is I still haven't figured out if I would get value going to jujitsu classes if there's a bunch of limitations in place.
yeah. And I don't know your schedule. I don't know how important your time is to you. I think you
Yeah,
will objectively be getting a worse quality product. Whether or not that product is still of value enough to be worth your time,
yeah,
just depends on what you're doing. I don't know if you're not doing anything and you're looking for a sport to pick up as a family. I mean, that's great. But like, if it would mean cutting out something else that's already really important to you, it's going to be a worse version. And what I would hate is for you to go and do the worst version and then be like, oh, jiu-jitsu sucks, and
yeah.
not
Right,
get to
right, right.
not I would hate that, and then you like never go back. That would make me the most upset. But
Gotcha.
I again, whatever keeps you, I think certainly don't write it off until you try the normal product.
Yeah, definitely want to wait that out. I mean, I don't know how long this thing lasts. And this is going to be completely different, but it kind of has to do with getting rid of COVID. I like to ask everybody that I have on the show, especially recently, because I go back and forth on this. I work in healthcare personally. I work in an operating room, and as you know, COVID vaccines about to release. How do you feel about them? And I say them, the scientists here and the people who organize these vaccines, going from saying that it would take 3 to 4 years to now randomly coming with something, by the end of the year, 3 4 months. Does that should that be something that a person like I, who's probably going to be first in line for this thing, should be wary of, in your opinion?
So I mean, so one thing is I am my girlfriend is doing her PhD in pharmacology.
Okay.
So that's medicine. Um,
Yes.
I'm just saying for other people because I didn't know that until a little while ago. Um, um, so he seems to think it's a good idea, and I'm kind of in this position where I'm deferring to the authority of the people that know more than I do. I
Sure.
think it's like I think it's totally reasonable to be cautious and risk averse and wanting to have evidence of safety before you take something that is going into your body. I think that's like a
Right.
really natural and reasonable response. Um, from what she's explained to me in a way that I have trouble understanding because it gets technical, this thing seems to be looking good in terms of safety. Um,
Okay.
and I'm okay with that. I think if I have a skepticism of the way that science functions, that would be it would be pretty hard to live life. I don't know. We would just have big problems if I had that kind of skepticism. And being with her has helped me see how peer reviewed science works, and it's pretty rigorous. And I mean, it's very rigorous, and it's a lot of people trying to find holes in this. A lot of people trying to point out problems. So when something comes out that is supported by this process, it's already gone through the ringer by people at least a lot more knowledgeable than me, and that instills with me I would say a high degree of confidence. I would take it.
Okay. All right. That's a good opinion. Yeah, I've back to the dichotomy of of control. I was very airy about it in the beginning. I was very against it, but like I said, it hasn't been announced yet, but it's probably going to be mandatory for me in the healthcare field. And what I've learned to do is worry about what I can control, right? Which is how what position I put my body in at the time of that happening. So, working out, being fit, eating well, keeping up with my vitamins, keeping up with, vitamin D, all that good stuff. And that's what I can control. I can't control if this thing is safe. I can't control if this thing is going to do anything, work or not. And unfortunately, I can't just walk away from my job, right? Like it's not one of those things
Mm.
that I'm in the position to do. So what I have is put this immense and intense focus on what could I do, and I still ask people, like I just asked you, and I asked other people how they feel about it. But to me, is I'm still worried about it, but more than other people, I'm probably in the best fit condition to be able to take this shot, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of I think there's something. I think that's a great idea of like saying something's gonna happen in my body. I'm gonna make my body as like strong as possible.
Right.
Um, no, I think that's quite inspiring response to it. Um, and then we can have all these scientific. I mean, I'm not scientifically knowledgeable enough to engage in the debate at that level. But at a baseline, anything runs a risk of being dangerous, and being as best physically prepared as possible just puts you in the best position. As you said, you might take it, it doesn't work, and then you get sick with COVID or something.
Yeah.
Then that physical preparation is going to pay off then anyway, right? So it's
Right.
kind of
Right.
putting. Yeah, I mean, I'm very motivated and inspired by that kind of approach to it.
Yeah, yeah, and going back to Seneca, I was basically suffering more in my imagination. I was thinking of these things, and I was just making some stuff up, and oh my god, and no this thing, and how could they do this so fast, and how could they force me to take this shot? And well, they didn't force me to do anything. All the decisions I've made up to this point in my life have gotten me to the point where I'm at now. So they didn't tell me to work
Mhm.
there. They're not telling me to show up every day. That's just a result of my decisions over time. But that's how I've been coping with it. I'm a lot better off with it. I had a really good friend of mine who's an IV therapist on the show a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the flu shot. But her insight on the flu shot kind of gave me a better understanding on the COVID shot with the whole, exposing your body to, the proteins so that you can start building. No, you start building the proteins when you get exposed to this thing, and then that's how you build the immunity.
Hmm.
And like you said, when you get people that are much smarter than we are, just talking about this stuff, it seems to make a lot more sense. It's like a
Well,
calming effect.
even those people, you know, I'm not confident because, you know, my girlfriend knows about this. I'm confident because my girlfriend knows enough to read what the other experts are saying, and like,
Sure.
and tell when there's bullshit and tell when there's not. And yeah, that's a great ability to have, and I can understand this anxiety because I'm in the same place where it's like I don't know how to like read this literature. Like I don't know. I just know this is something that's going to like affect me and my family, and it's like,
Yeah.
you know, and there is good reason to be skeptical in certain points because, as you talked about, there's been a lot of changing. But yeah, I mean, it's been explained to me in a way that makes me feel comfortable and confident in it. But
Yeah,
as you said,
definitely.
regardless of that, you know go for some runs and eat well and work out, and
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, just be, to practice one of the virtues, just to be courageous, right? I to kind of take this. If this is going to be bad, take this bullet for my family, right? Take this bullet for the people that are following me, right? Because technically, I would quote unquote be a guinea pig, but it goes back to another Marcus Aurelius line, which I know you and I can throw these lines around all day. But another Marcus Aurelius line where it's like, no, it's fortunate that this happened to me because I'm able to deal with this, as opposed to
Hmm.
somebody who's weaker who can't deal with it.
Oh,
So
that's really nice.
I've just wrapped my, I've used philosophy and I've used, well, Stoic philosophy, and I've used, things like that to kind of, and the information that I'm receiving from smarter people to basically walk myself off the ledge and not be so anxious about it and suffer.
Yeah, I think that's great. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah. So, Michael, you told me, you described to me your goal of trying to introduce more and more people to ancient philosophy and how it can help them. How's that going, man? What are you working on currently?
Sure.
And
Yeah. So I mean, right now I'm in school, so it's this tough thing where what I really want to do is help people, and what I really see, the important thing, what I see is I see there's all these great people. I mean, we're just kind of talking about with the science, right? There's all these great people doing philosophy in a way that's like really complicated and confusing and not accessible. And then there's people who like want to learn and want to get out of autopilot and be engaged and like
right,
learn about this kind of stuff. But even me, I'm doing my PhD and I pick up a philosophy book and it's boring and hard, like an academic one.
right,
Um, so there has to be some sort of knowledge transference of people who are, what I want to do is I want to get in a position, where I can engage with the drier stuff and then communicate in a way that's like accessible and interesting. Um, and so basically, what I'm doing is I'm trying to develop that skill set. I'm learning ancient Greek. I'm learning Latin. This ability to engage with the original texts,
yeah,
writing articles on them. Really getting my foundation in Stoicism and ancient philosophy down, and then hopefully try to break out into some popular stuff and write some books. I'm planning to write a book on Stoicism and martial arts, or Stoicism and sport, in the future. But that kind of unfortunately isn't going to happen until I get a academic job or a teaching job. So trying to
sure.
balance both of those. Other than that, right now, just doing podcasts, talking about it, blogging a little bit. Um, but it's definitely a long term goal.
Gotcha. Yeah, I found. I don't know if you read. Do you read Robert Greene books at all? 48 Laws of Power, all that good stuff.
No, but he is Ryan Holiday's mentor, right?
Correct. Yeah. And what
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is that, and I think this can actually help you out, is what I've been enthused in is, I say their ability, but it's really Robert's ability that was just passed on. The ability to, like you said, get all the dry stuff and be able to tell stories to make them, hit close to home, basically. And I think those guys are masters at that. And not only am I looking forward to anything that you're going to put out, but I think this old dry philosophy works well when you're able to correlate it to historical examples or everyday life examples. I don't know if you're doing that presently or not, but I do like that way of learning philosophy, for
Yeah,
whatever
that's
that's
one thing.
worth.
I mean, that's one thing I noticed about you is you were very knowledgeable of the historical factors. Um, and we're just like storytelling creatures, right? Like I don't know, like if
Yeah,
you look at I'm going to speak about the Bible because I'm kind of, I guess you're agnostic, so I kind of look at it like a philosophically, I suppose. Like I think it's this thing of like really interesting, ideas and concepts,
yeah,
and values. But these are all told through stories, right? And there's a reason why it's so popular because, if it was just like a list of things to do and not do, it wouldn't have the same kind of appeal. And so we even take these Stoic philosophers and we tell stories about their lives, and it helps connect ironically at an emotional level, I would say,
yeah,
which is ironic for Stoicism, but that's what's important because that's what motivates us, and that's what inspires us. And so, getting a little bit drier and being a little bit more technical, Aristotle talked about this type of philosophy called protreptic philosophy, and
okay,
that's Greek for pro is to turn, or sorry, pro is towards, and treptic is to turn. So it's to turn people towards things. So it was a genre of philosophy where the goal was just motivational. The goal was just to inspire you and turn you towards things. And I think the reason why people like Seneca and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius is they're very inspiring. They're interlaced with these stories. And what Ryan Holiday and these contemporary people are doing very well is what they're doing is protreptic philosophy. And that's something that's not really being valued or done as much as I would like to see in an academic context. But it's so valuable, right? Like if it's not motivating, inspiring, and mobilizing people, it's just a non-starter, and the other stuff you're doing doesn't really have a point.
right, right. I agree with that. Yeah, Ryan. He see obstacle the way wasn't necessarily a stoic history guide. It was just more contemptual examples of how big historical figures like Edison and stuff were able to kind of have the virtues and do these things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what I obviously read Robert Greene before I even knew who Ryan Holiday was, but I did eat sort of how Robert Greene kind of leans on old Chinese philosophy and stuff like that. Ryan's kind of hit that with Stoicism, and he's kind of hit a groove where he's able to make things like exactly how you said, like basically get that dry stuff that you would have to sit in probably like a college classroom and try to stomach, and turn it into something that's like, oh, wait a minute. Well, that person did that and that was stoic of them. Maybe I can model that behavior, that type of stuff. But I agree, man. I'm excited. I agree with you in the sense that I don't think it's happening enough. There isn't enough people that are doing it. But it kind of sounds like that's what you're about to get on. And I'm super interested on what you got coming up, especially with the Stoic philosophy and sports or martial arts, like you said. Um, I'm
Yeah,
interested
thank
to
you.
see what you got going on, man. Michael, we
um,
could talk forever. I'm sure. Go ahead. You can say what you're gonna say.
no, I was gonna say like when you say it needs to happen more often, and man, I took an elective in university that was a philosophy course just for fun, and I fell
Yep.
in love with it. I didn't even know this thing existed, right? I didn't even know what philosophy was. So you say it's not happy, and it's like I feel that even with myself. It's like I'm a person who loves it, and I didn't even know it was a thing
Yeah.
until until I was like 19, 20. Um, why did I make it this far without like being exposed to this stuff? And it's just because it's not happening in a way that's engaging for people, and that's part of the fault is the way that like the academics treat it. But yeah, I mean we're on the same page. That's a mission you
Sure.
believe in. It's a mission that I believe in, and I hope for you too that you before you sign up that consider engaging in some other philosophies too when you get the time. Stoicism is great, but there's a lot of other cool ancient Greek stuff going on as well, and it's a really exciting time period all over the place.
Yeah, I want to. I do know a little bit about Plato, a little bit about Socrates.
Cool,
But to me, it's I only have so much bandwidth, right? Like I can only do so many things.
absolutely.
And I'm one of the guys that when a rabbit hole is presented to me and it looks interesting, I'm going head first.
Yeah.
So for my own sanity, I have to kind of like focus on certain things. But yeah,
Limit the number of rabbit holes you go down because they take up too
absolutely,
much
man.
time.
I just went down and I did it a few years ago and I'm coming back to it. So I'm kind of sheepish in that behavior, but I'm going down a Bitcoin rabbit hole right now.
Oh,
And
okay.
I got that going on. I've completely went from traditional lifting weight like plates and bars to complete full kettlebell stuff. So I'm going down that rabbit hole and learning how to do that stuff. I have this podcast and I actually am a podcast connoisseur. So the average person consumes an hour or two. I literally consume 8 to 10 hours a day. I mean, it's because I work too, but I can have it in my ear and I consume podcast a lot. So I'm actually getting together with a bunch of creatives and starting a podcast network. So
Oh, awesome.
I'm going through that rabbit hole of learning the podcast industry, the ins and
Oh,
outs. So yeah, I'm spread pretty, and then I'm a family guy, right? I got 4 children. I'm happily
yeah.
married. So I do want to go down philosophy, but I need to make space for that.
No, absolutely. Just that no, I totally agree. It's about appropriate time management, especially when you're the kind of person who, really digs into things. I get that.
Yeah, and I'm about to go down the jujitsu rabbit hole. So
Oh, there you go.
we
So drop everything else and just
yeah,
get
we've
started.
added that one during the conversation. I mean, my interest was peaked, but now I'm ready to go. Get choked out.
You already sound like a perfect jitsu person. You like, kettlebells and stoicism and Bitcoin, and you get some podcasts and jitsu. You got a good set of interests that all kind of feed into each other.
Yeah, man. But what it all boils down to at the end of the day is just having great conversations like this one.
Yeah.
I started the podcast thing because I found it increasingly harder to have these conversations online, right? And I actually think it's impossible to have a very solid conversation online and any platform. So that's when I really got into the podcast thing because I would listen to these podcast episodes and I'm like, wow, like I picked up more in this 3-hour episode of whoever than I have from Fox News or from somewhere else. So
Yeah.
now, since it's so hard to get a good conversation going, I kind of just build this as an arena where I can have great people like yourself come and talk and have great conversation.
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, it's a great project, and I had a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Is there anywhere you want to send anybody, like a call to action, your website, or?
I mean, I have a website at tremblaymichael.com. If you Google me, there's some more podcasts and YouTube stuff. I guess the call to action is just to get people into Stoicism. If you thought this was interesting, you know, consider picking up a book, consider reading a bit about it and implementing it. I think that's really what I want to turn people towards. The other thing I like to say is like if anybody wants a starting place with that, some advice about books or anything, feel free to shoot me a message. I always love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And where could they find you on? Where, Twitter, or where do you want them to go
Yeah, I'm on
to shoot you?
Twitter's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
which
Okay. And what are
is
you on Twitter?
oh, I gotta look this up now.
Yeah, no
Okay.
worries, man.
Off
I'll
the
put
top
all
of
the
my
links
head,
in the description too. So
it's underscore Mike Tremblay.
okay, awesome. Yeah, man. I'll put the descriptions in the notes, and I hope the people listening got as much out of this conversation as I did. Michael, you've been fantastic, man. Thank you so much for answering the call and coming on.
Thank you.
All right, brother. Another great conversation in the books. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. As you can see, philosophy is a way to reshape your world and reshape your thoughts for the better. It has helped me immensely in the year 2020 and COVID and everything that's going on with politics and the polarization. I suggest you guys look into Stoic Philosophy. It's extremely helpful. As always, guys, I appreciate y'all. Please rate, share, and subscribe this episode so I can continue to have the conversations that I like to have and you can continue to have the conversations that you love to listen to. As always, guys, take care.